Did you see that? What was that?
Triton, release her!
Get out of the water!
The killer whale may leave its ocean, but the ocean never leaves the killer whale.
The day began like any other bright skies. Children clutching popcorn, families lining up with phones raised high. The air smelled of sunscreen and fried food. Laughter rippled through the stands, and a sense of spectacle hung heavy, as if nothing could possibly go wrong. Then, in the space of a breath, everything changed. A scream cut through the music. Gasps replaced laughter. What moments earlier felt like a postcard of summer joy twisted into a nightmare unfolding in real time. At the center of it all was Elise Maro. To the audience, she wasn't just another performer. She was the star, the face printed on every brochure and billboard, the promise that this place was safe, magical, and worth every dollar. When she stepped out beside the park's prize predator, the crowd rose to their feet. It was beauty and danger on display, the kind of pairing that draws thousands. What they didn't know was that beneath the painted smiles and choreographed wonder fault lines were already cracking. Witnesses would later recall how ordinary it all seemed in those first seconds. Elise waved the music, sword, cameras flashed. But somewhere between the cheers and the glittering water, a different story was waiting to erupt. This wasn't just about entertainment. This wasn't just a show, it was a countdown, one no one in the stands could see ticking down. And here's the part that makes the blood run cold. Elise herself had sensed something was wrong in the days leading up to that performance. Friends would remember her words, vague but unsettling, about the animal's strange behavior. Yet she showed up professional to the end. Elise wasn't only a trainer. She had spent a decade building her life around this animal, believing she understood him better than anyone else. But what happened next would rip that belief apart and expose a truth darker than anyone in the audience could imagine. The show began like a dream. Elise stood at the edge of the pool, her posture confident, her smile radiant, every movement rehearsed to perfection. With a flick of her hand, the enormous black and white shape beneath the surface surged upward, breaking into a magnificent leap. Water exploded across the stands, drenching the first rows in cold salt spray, and the crowd erupted in cheers. For a moment, it looked like magic, a human and a predator moving as one, the illusion of trust binding them together. To anyone watching, it seemed flawless. Elise clapped her hands, and the orca responded with pinpoint accuracy, rolling, diving, launching her skyward in a maneuver that sent her soaring 15 feet above the water before splashing down again. Cameras flashed like strobe lights. Children screamed with delight. Parents leaned forward, recording every second for social media. It was the grand finale, the routine that had been designed to leave the audience breathless. And it worked. But what the cheering families didn't see was the cost of that spectacle. They didn't know that orcas in the wild can travel 100 miles in a single day. Their massive brains wired for intricate social bonds and freedom of movement. Here, confined in a concrete pool no bigger than a backyard pond, their instincts were suffocating. To them, the tricks weren't harmony, they were control, obedience, and repression. What looked like a partnership was in fact an illusion, a carefully manufactured performance crafted to sell tickets, not a reflection of genuine trust. And just as Elise signaled for the final gentle lap around the pool, the closing bow that always ended the show, something unexpected happened. The orca did not follow. Instead, he lingered on the far side of the tank, unusually still, and the illusion began to crack. At first, the pause seemed harmless. Elise kept smiling, her body bobbing gently in the pool as she gave the signal again. The crowd continued to clap, assuming the hesitation was part of the act. Then slowly the orca began to move. His sleek body sliced through the water, heading straight toward her. But the way he swam was wrong. Faster, uneven. The rhythm that once felt like choreography had shifted into something jagged, unpredictable. An experienced trainer watching from the control booth felt his stomach tighten. To the untrained eye, it looked playful, almost comical, the giant animal circling, brushing past Elise as if teasing her. The stands erupted in laughter when he bumped her with his side, sending a small splash across the pool. But in the world of animal training, that wasn't a joke. That was a warning, a test. Elise's smile faltered just for a fraction of a second, barely enough for the cameras to catch. But her eyes told another story. She treaded water with deliberate calm, trying not to show fear, repeating the hand signal she had given countless times before. This time, the orca ignored it. Instead, he curved back around faster, more forceful brushing, closer to her legs. For the families in the stands, the music still played triumphantly, masking the tension building beneath the surface. Parents pointed, children squealed, the illusion still holding barely. But to the trainers on the sidelines, alarm bells were blaring. They knew what the audience didn't. This was no longer a performance. It was the beginning of a struggle for control, one that Elise might not win. That gentle bump the audience had cheered was not affection. It was the first crack in the facade, the predator reminding everyone who truly ruled the water. And within seconds, the test would escalate into something far more terrifying, an eruption of instinct no one could stop. The shift from performance to panic happened in less than 10 seconds. As Elise angled toward the side of the pool, the emergency procedure every trainer memorized, the orca lunged with a burst of impossible speed. In an instant, he cut her off, blocking her escape like a living wall of muscle and teeth. The triumphant music that moments ago filled the stadium now rang hollow, sinister, like the soundtrack to a scene gone wrong. He didn't bite right away. Instead, he clamped his mouth gently around her arm, the very move that was once part of a routine rehearsed hundreds of times. But this time, he refused to let go. The crowd erupted in confused murmurs, some still clapping, others raising phones higher, thinking it was an unscheduled trick. Then Elise vanished beneath the surface, dragged down into the blue. Gasps rippled through the stands. A child screamed. Parents leaned forward, expecting her to rocket back out of the water in the signature finale. But when she resurfaced, it wasn't triumph, it was desperation. She broke the surface, gasping, eyes wide, just long enough to draw breath before the orca yanked her under again. Behind the scenes, silent alarms triggered. Trainers rushed to the edges, slapping the water, shaking buckets of fish, shouting commands designed to break the animal's focus. But the orca was locked in. His movements were deliberate, calculated. He dragged Elise across the pool like a toy, surfacing just long enough for her to catch a breath before plunging her back into the depths. The audience's cheers twisted into shrieks of horror as the reality sank in. This wasn't part of the show. The perfect illusion had shattered. Parents covered their children's eyes, some rushing for the exits. Others frozen in their seats as the nightmare unfolded before them. The water churned violently, a stage transformed into a battleground between human fragility and raw, uncontainable power. What seemed like a playful dance was in truth the predator reclaiming control instincts that had been caged for years, tearing back to the surface. And this was only the beginning, because the horrifying spectacle was about to stretch on, minute after minute, turning the stadium into a theater of terror no one could escape. By the time staff managed to lure the orca away, the pool had fallen into a terrible silence, broken only by the panic cries echoing through the stands. Parents clutched their children, some rushing for the exits, while others stood frozen, unable to process what they had just seen. The water, once sparkling under the sun, now carried faint streaks of red that told a story no one wanted to believe. The illusion of magic had collapsed, leaving only the raw, undeniable weight of tragedy. Within hours, Blue Sea Park scrambled into damage control mode. A statement was drafted before Elise's body was even taken from the pool. Reporters were told it was a tragic accident, that she had simply slipped and fallen, triggering a confused reaction from the animal. Words like unforeseeable and misunderstood dominated the press release. By the time the evening news aired, the narrative was already shifting from predator and prey to human error and unfortunate chance. Behind closed doors, though, the truth was less forgiving. Internal radio chatter later leaked captured frantic voices, trainers screaming emergency codes, and officials ordering silence over the comms. Staff were instructed not to speak to the press, not to speculate, and above all, not to suggest the orca had acted with intent. The company's billion-dollar image depended on it. What the public didn't know was that this wasn't the first time. Buried in legal archives and incident reports were records of previous close calls, moments where the same animal had lunged, refused commands, or shown erratic behavior. Incidents brushed aside, smoothed over, hidden beneath mountains of paperwork. And if one truth could be buried so easily, it begged a darker question: what else had been concealed in the shadows of this carefully manufactured paradise? The official story didn't hold for long. Within days, cracks appeared in the carefully polished narrative. Former trainers, some still haunted by their own close calls, began speaking out. They described ignored warnings, rushed training schedules, and a culture where profit always came before safety. One recalled how Elise herself had confided that the animal was becoming harder to control, but supervisors dismissed her concerns as overthinking. Another revealed secret memos about Triton's history of aggression, memos that mysteriously never reached the public. Animal rights activists seized the moment. Outside the park gates, crowds gathered with hand-painted signs bearing Elise's face, chanting for justice, not just for her, but for the creatures confined behind glass walls. Television crews swarmed, capturing angry parents demanding to know why they were allowed to sit in the stands while their children watched a woman die. For the first time, the park's glossy facade was cracking under the weight of questions it could no longer silence. Behind the scenes, executives doubled down. Settlements were quietly offered to Elise's family and colleagues, accompanied by strict non-disclosure agreements. Trainers were paraded on morning talk shows to repeat the same lines about deep love for the animals and unpredictable accidents. But the more they spoke, the less convincing it sounded. The footage of the attack was circulating online, raw and undeniable. No amount of scripted reassurance could erase the images burned into the public's memory. What had once been sold as a symbol of wonder was now revealed as a machine of exploitation, with both humans and animals caught in its gears. And yet, amid the protests and media frenzy, one question loomed larger than the rest. Was this tragedy simply the product of stress and captivity? Or was it the first sign of something far more unsettling? A rebellion written in the instincts of the deep. As the outrage spread, the conversation shifted from corporate negligence to something even more disturbing: the nature of the animals themselves. Marine biologists stepped forward with chilling insights. Orcas, they explained, weren't just large predators. They were highly social creatures with dialects, traditions, and memories passed down through generations. Some researchers argued that captivity didn't just cause stress, it shattered an entire cultural system. Imagine ripping a human child from its community and confining it to a solitary cell. The scars would not only be psychological, but generational. Stranger still were the new reports emerging from the wild. Off the coast of Europe, pods of orcas had begun targeting sailboats, not killing the passengers, but deliberately disabling the vessels as if sending a message. To many, these incidents looked like games. To others, they resembled strategy, organized acts of defiance against human intrusion. Could it be coincidence that such behaviors gained attention just as the world was reeling from Elise's death? Or were we witnessing something larger, a ripple effect stretching across oceans? Theories piled up, each more unsettling than the last. Some experts whispered about collective memory, the possibility that orcas retained impressions of their capture, passing them down like family stories etched in blood. Others speculated that violent incidents in captivity weren't random at all, but deliberate expressions of revolt, a kind of language we hadn't yet learned to translate. The idea was terrifying, that these creatures weren't simply lashing out, but speaking in the only way they could through actions too brutal to ignore. What if Elise's death wasn't just an accident or a symptom of stress, but a line in the sand, an unmistakable declaration that the balance between humans and the ocean's apex predator had been broken? And if that was true, then the tragedy at Blue Sea Park was never an isolated event. It was the opening act of a story still unfolding, one that forces us to ask whether we've unleashed a force we can no longer contain. In the months that followed, Blue Sea Park tried desperately to rebuild its image. The shows were rebranded as educational programs. The breeding program was quietly ended, and trainers were no longer allowed to swim in the water. But the damage was done. Attendance plummeted, ticket sales collapsed, and the once shimmering promise of family entertainment now stood as a monument to denial and disaster. For many, the image of Elise smiling beside her orca had been permanently replaced by the haunting memory of her final struggle. Her story became a rallying cry. Documentaries were made, lawmakers debated, and petitions spread across continents. What had once been dismissed as fringe activism turned into a global movement. Parents who had once bought tickets for birthday parties now signed petitions to end captivity. Scientists who once lent their expertise to parks shifted their voices to the other side, warning that no tank could ever replace the wild. Elise's death was no longer just a tragedy, it was a turning point. Yet the larger question remains, how far are we willing to go for the sake of spectacle? At what point does our hunger for wonder cross the line into cruelty? The ocean holds mysteries we may never fully understand, and perhaps that is the point. Some creatures are not meant to be caged, not meant to be paraded for our applause. The real legacy of Elise Maro is not the tragedy itself, but the reminder it carved into our collective memory that the killer whale may leave its ocean, but the ocean never leaves the killer whale. And so we leave you with this question: should we ever again keep such magnificent predators for our entertainment? Or is it time to admit that some wonders are meant to remain untamed? If stories like this make you question the world we think we know, stay with us. Hit like if you believe these truths deserve to be told, and subscribe for more deep dives into the shadows beneath the surface.